Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you spending the time with us today. And we're pretty certain you're going to find this session both beneficial and enjoyable. My name is Rod Chafee, and I'm a strategic sales manager here at Markforged. And today I'm joined by a panel of colleagues from the Würth Group and Markforged, who will share with us their thoughts on additive manufacturing's impact on global sustainability. So first, let's go through our agenda for today. We're going to go around the room and have the panel introduce themselves and their company. We're going to learn a bit about the carbon cycle and the magnitude of impact that we and our companies and society have on sustainability. We're going to learn about a single parts journey through the manufacturing process. We're going to learn about digital inventories. And then finally, we're going to talk about some additional benefits that additive manufacturing brings to sustainability. I want to make sure that today's meeting is interactive, so you should have a Q&A button on your screen somewhere. And if you click on that button, you can type in your comments and questions, and we will get to as many questions as we can, time permitting this morning. So now let's get started with AJ and Ben from the Würth Group. AJ, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Sure. My name is AJ Strandquist. I've been with Würth for about 9 years now. Würth's core business is in the industrial supply chain and support. So helping people put things together. For over 75 years, it's been privately held with very strong continual growth and financial standing worldwide, where expansions into new technologies, new processes, and ways to support our customers, which we view additive manufacturing as a vehicle for that, allows us to invest and move forward very quickly to our customers' needs. So we'll talk a little bit more about it today, but we're excited to be here and talk a little bit about what digital inventory can kind of do for people. And with that, I'd hand it to Ben.
Yeah, my name's Ben Cybulski. I'm the Director of Sales for the Würth Additive Group. And yeah, just tailoring on to what AJ says, we're a big old school industrial supply chain company, but we've done a lot to innovate. I think over the last 5 years, the Würth Group has invested about $1 billion into new technologies and facilities around the world. And part of what we're going to be sharing today is, some of that investment and what we've learned.
Okay, great. So here's another slide of information about Würth. Do you guys, any comments on this slide?
No, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, Ben, let me, Ben's been in the group for 1 year, but he already knows more stats and has all of the factoids. So I'll lead into it a little bit. Our conversation today is with that global footprint and dealing with industrial supply, of course, we have an eye on sustainability and safe practices for both the environment and people in their facilities, right? And so with that, being headquartered out of Germany, we really want to drive that kind of innovation and success with finding more sustainable and safer products. So with that, now I might hand it over to Ben as he can help give some highlights, and maybe I'll fill in the gaps. But Ben, I mean, you've been doing a lot of research with our partners along with Markforged on the topic, and talk a little bit about what Würth has been doing.
Yeah, so I'm on our sustainability team for Additive, and what we've been trying to do, and we'll get into it a little bit more when we talk about why additive and sustainability, but it's actually to quantify the effect of additive as far as a single part or an assembly to see how much really you do reduce your carbon footprint. But outside of that, our company has a pretty strong culture into sustainability. Our group is ISO 14001 certified. You can read the slide, but it's the environmental management system. We do have a large amount of LEED certified properties, and we have a lot of ongoing environmental projects. As we see industry transforming, Würth is, being flexible and pivoting with it. So we are trying to quantify and investing heavily into digital inventory solutions and sustainable additive manufacturing, as well as just redeveloping our core products with, an eco line of chemical products, varieties of sustainable projects within quality management, our building projects, updating facilities, I'm sure we could have AJ talk about some of the facilities in Germany that are pretty extreme as far as how they go about sustainability, and then go even down to purchasing and procurement. We want to make sure the people we're buying from and supplying our customers with are also taking the environment into consideration.
There's a bunch of factoids. The one that's fun to share is there's sheep that eat the grass instead of running lawnmowers. So it goes as far as having sheep and pumping water from a nearby lake to cool a building for air conditioning. And I can tell you, while that's great for the environment, it is not great for an overweight American sitting in a German conference room. So like I said, it's good for the turtles though. So let's hand it back over to Markforged.
All right, perfect. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Okay, Charles, let's move to Charles from Markforged. Can you give us a brief introduction on yourself, and then give us a few thoughts on your feelings around additive and what Markforged is doing?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Charles Liu. I'm an application engineer based in the Markforged headquarters office in Watertown, Massachusetts. And I've been with the company about going on 4 years now, and mostly have been focused on helping customers figure out what exactly it is that they're going to do with the additive technology. You know, there's, I would consider additive to be one type of tool. And as an engineering organization, you need a variety of tools to do all of the things that you need to do. So Markforged is based in the Boston, Massachusetts area. We were established in 2013 and come mostly out of the tech space in the area. So a lot of both of our founders are from MIT, and the smart guys. It's not me, but we mostly at this point have been working with strategic accounts as far as expansion and investment goes. And you can see on our list of strategic investors that we're working with Microsoft, Porsche, Siemens, and Summit Partners. And a lot of these are fueled by what we're doing in the software, hardware, and application space of additive. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. So the crux of the Markforged product is that we are making a 3D printing ecosystem that includes the hardware, software, and materials so that engineers can build anything that they need to build. This is primarily, if you were to look back to 2012 when we were founded, this was about making strong parts. 3D printing at the time was not about making strong parts. It was mostly plastics. And what we sought out to do was make parts that could actually be used to replace metals. So we're now working with carbon fiber and actually printing metal. The product is based on next generation Internet of Things connectivity. So everything's connected to the cloud, and we have a distributed fleet of printers across the world. This all added together, if we want to call the ecosystem one cohesive product, we call it a digital forge. And so what that means is that this product is a tool that is built to address your problems today, but because we are applying that digital aspect to it and using software to enhance the hardware, this will also continue to grow and develop so that you can build what you need tomorrow. So let's take this back to the prehistoric era, and maybe even not so long ago, prior to really the industrial revolutions. The carbon cycle, as it is, probably very simply understood, this is a sort of simplification of it, is based around plants and animals sort of exchanging carbon and absorbing energy from the sun. So if you were to kind of look at this cycle here, the sun is giving energy to the earth. The plants are turning that into oxygen. The oxygen is then used by the animals who produce CO2, and you see this exchange going on. And for the most part, for the first probably for the first like several billion years, after everything sort of settled in, and once organisms were populating the earth, the carbon balance is pretty neutral. So the amount of CO2 emitted and the amount of CO2 absorbed by the atmosphere was sort of at a balance. And ultimately, all of the sunk carbon gets put into the earth and turned into fossil fuels later on. Now introduce humanity, right? We go through these industrial revolutions and start to use And we figured out that oil was this great source of energy. So we dug it out of the earth and started using it. And what that ended up doing was releasing a lot of that CO2 that was buried in the earth through industrial processes. And so now you're seeing that we're actually emitting way more CO2 than the CO2 that is absorbed. And what that CO2 is doing, and not just the CO2, there are a variety of other impacts that humanity has, but just purely looking at CO2, the consequences of climate change really are that what we see on a daily basis, that we're hearing about melting ice caps, we're hearing about flooding, and we're hearing about droughts and storms. These are the things that are happening today. But what that's contributing to, and what's happening and what will happen, is that those melting ice caps mean that we have rising sea levels. Species going extinct means that we have less biodiversity and become at risk to becoming a singular species on the planet. Extreme weather patterns mean that there's going to be increasing loss of life and property. And what we see is the change that's happening today. Climate change really is a threat multiplier. What that means is that the things that we see today are just the beginning. And we talk about having a global supply chain, a food supply chain, where we're running pretty much bare to the bone here, trying to supply food for the entire world. What that risk, if that's compounded, means that we could see a huge starvation event if we don't take this seriously. The first thing I think about when I hear climate change is like, oh, well, I gotta do my part, right? I need to go. I need to fly less. I need to. Well, I can't really afford it yet, but maybe one day I'll get myself an electric vehicle. Composting, eating less meat, reducing your home energy consumption. These are all things that you can do to combat climate change on a personal level. And what that results in is about 8 tons of CO2 emissions saved over the course of a year, right? So that's great. That's a great start. But when we think about that in the context of everything else, that is a very small piece of the puzzle. The group choices that happen can contribute to 40,000 tons of CO2 emission savings. So that's a lot of the things that that Ben and AJ mentioned that Würth was doing, right? It's the green initiatives, it's digital transformation, it's logistics consolidation. These types of decisions that are made by Würth and Würth's customers are ultimately going to far outweigh any personal choices. Now, this is one group which comprises a lot of people. So if everybody in that group also made their personal choices, we would double the effect, right? But that to say that group choices have a huge impact, and they may not seem apparent to you how big those are. And if you wanted to take that one step further and extrapolate out, then we've got societal choices, right? And where we're talking about 10 billion tons of CO2, and these are policy changes, renewable energy infrastructure, carbon taxes. These are things that might be outside of our pay grades here, right? But we certainly can aspire towards that. So we'll take a quick look at what a conventional supply chain actually entails in terms of carbon footprint. So if you were trying to figure out what exactly it is that getting a part from the manufacturer to your door, turning that from raw material into a part actually costs the planet, you might be surprised to find out that most of that is not in manufacturing, distribution, or regional shipping. Those are actually pretty small components of it. It is the transportation for those goods that is actually the leading cause of CO2 emissions. At this point, over 70%. If you were to expedite a part to get something quickly, what that means is that you might end up paying a lot in CO2 emissions on a per part basis, and you might not see that based on the cost to you, right? Like the dollar value. That might not be seen there, but each part that you are getting expedited, sent overseas, is costing the planet a lot. So when you look at the total CO2 emissions of conventional supply chains, where I guess we've been doing a lot of our thinking at Markforged is how does our process actually stack up? And when you 3D print, instead of having to ship an entire package, maybe you got minimum order quantities, right? Instead of trying to ship a lot of material to the point of need each time that you need to do it, what we're doing is instead putting the raw material at the point of need such that you can reduce a lot of those shipping costs. You don't ship packaging anymore. You don't ship multiple items. And that compounded with the fact that carbon fiber can produce parts that are lighter than some of the metal counterparts means that you're actually reducing on average probably 94% of your carbon footprint by 3D printing it instead of shipping it. And to give you a sense of context of what that means, the total CO2 footprint, which this is estimated by one of my colleagues is working with the State Department on a publication here, the total footprint for a single expedited part could be as high as 14 tons of CO2. And that's based on some average of an average size part. That 14 tons already that one part outweighs all of the personal choices that you made in the year, right? So when you think about, I'm not trying to belittle the personal choices that you make. I think we should still continue to make those. Every piece counts. But if you focus elsewhere and you look at other areas, you may find that you can have a huge impact on the carbon footprint of humanity without actually having to make as many personal sacrifices at all.
All right, perfect. That's good, Charles. It's a lot of good information, and it's really good background information for us as we continue the conversation. So appreciate it. Thank you. So now let's turn to AJ and Ben and have you guys talk to us a little bit about what Würth's doing and how you're using digital inventory to support sustainability efforts.
Yeah, definitely. And I can maybe start it off. AJ, you can come in whenever you want to. And then I know we're getting some questions from the crowd. I think Rod, if we have some time, maybe we just start shooting through some of those and answering them. But why AM for sustainability? This kind of tailors into one of the questions of the how part. I'll go into the how and the why. One of the big things is as we're transitioning to newer forms of manufacturing and as industry by and large is adopting 3D printing, not just for prototypes or anything not just for tooling, but for on-demand MRO, for light production parts, you're seeing more and more this transition to digital twins and digital inventory versus physical inventory. So you're doing a lot there. You're reducing the size of your overall manufacturing facility, possibly. You're reducing your costs, which everyone cares about as well, and you're freeing up a lot more resources for sustainability and for your team. When you're doing AM, just kind of as Charles, talked about a minute ago, you're eliminating a lot of greenhouse gases from traditional supply chain. Now, we ship a lot of boxes. AJ is going to tell you a little bit about that. So we get this. Additive isn't a good fit for all of your parts. It's just not. But for between, if you look at a larger OEM's parts cube, maybe between 5 and 15% are good candidates for additive. That means it's going to be an adequate application. It's going to provide you with adequate cost savings. And you're going to be able to do it and keep up with the production of that part. Looking to replace not all of your parts, but that small amount, and then knowing that it's sustainable is kind of a huge shift that we're seeing within manufacturing. No waste, obviously. If you're comparing it with a CNC machine, right, you're hogging something out of 6061 aluminum or whatever. When you're printing something in a carbon fiber composite on an X7, you have very, very minimal waste except for your support material. Minimal investment with substantial cost savings. This is huge. This is what we're seeing the most of. People and manufacturers have already made the investment into additive. What they haven't kind of connected, and a lot of people are now, is that additive is sustainable. So they haven't necessarily been quantifying how sustainable it is and what the effect is on their business. And now what people have been doing is realizing, hey, we're already doing this. We can get some credit for being more sustainable. We can become more appealing with our customers. And then if we are going to invest into something which may traditionally be a newer business venture, which could be a cost sink, here's a way to get cost savings and become more sustainable. Let's expand this program to multiple plants. And that's what we're seeing. And with our Würth is partnering with a lot of larger energy companies. One of them is Baker Hughes. And we are working on this as they're going through kind of evolution of their company, pulling, diversifying themselves away from just oil field service equipment into new forms of technology, new forms of energy. We see them trying to quantify this a lot. So we're working with them closely to try to actually figure out exactly what additive manufacturing does for the environment and how sustainable it is and what the overall big picture looks like in a 10-year roadmap. And I've rambled enough. AJ, you want to kind of pick up where I left off?
I think maybe we can give a couple live examples, to walk through like a thought process, right? And that's where, like in the chat, there was the question about, well, if you're manufacturing an EV, you have this waste and you're mining, and similar the argument or the logic is, well, 3D printing still uses, and you have to create the plastic and you have to have equipment built, and why is that different than a CNC is? So there's a couple different things I think we should talk about there is, because admittedly, if you're comparing buying a brand new EV versus recycling an older car, that's an admittedly murky subject to make that work in terms of being sustainable, environmentally friendly. That's true. But let's think of how those products are made and maintained instead, not the final product being an old car versus an EV. So for instance, with those old cars, is with additive, is when those tools get worn out, is historically that maker would have the decision, do I go get a fresh set of tools made so the next time I'm punching plastic through it, it's in spec, or do I not support this anymore? So by not supporting anymore, you're not allowing people to repair their product, you're not allowing it to stay on the road for longer, you're sinking your energy into making that product and you're not getting the full life out of it. But now instead is that same older vehicle should have their parts switched to a digital passport, that if someone in 3026 wanted to get that part, you have a little, I was about to say floppy disk, I'm 90 years old, but you would have your flash drive from 2021 and you would pull it out, you would plug it into your computer, it would update it for all the latest tech, and you would punch out that part. So now you're not making those tools. Those tools aren't being cut. That metal's not being mined. You're not shipping those extremely heavy units. You're not putting them in a warehouse for years at a time to not be used until you have to make the next run. So it's not, is upcycling or recycling better? Almost always. But if you are making new products, think of it with this type of manufacturing process in mind, not with manual physical like CNC and manual punches and things like that. Is set it to where you can send an email to somebody and they can get a part. Think of it that way. As I always say, is the best way to think about additive is like emails to letters or to a fax machine. It's just like it was laborious for you to make that part in some location where you have that specialty and send it. That's a lot of extra steps in between, as opposed to you design a part, you send an email, someone looks at it in 5 seconds and gives you a thumbs up, right? So really is you have to think of in your life, whether you're an OEM or a customer, of those times in your life where thing made that switch to an electronic or digital solution. Music, video, the communications, it's always made your life easier, right? It's a lot easier to punch in the GPS and have the Google Maps lady talk to you than it is getting out your Douglas Atlas and navigating the back roads of Illinois, right? So that's where I think is you have to think of it the same way. Is it's going to speed things up. It's going to make, instead of having years and years of documentation for your company, it's going to be stored on the hard drive. And if you want to move your company's building, you're not moving tons of paper, you're moving your zip drive and you're on your way, right? So one is to think of it as if you are having to build something brand new, think of it with this technology in mind for its sustainability, that if the car breaks down in Oklahoma, Louisiana and New York, one central engineer has that digital file and sends that part out to be printed. You control it, you have local manufacturing, you don't have stocking levels. There are companies that are building out entire solutions and repair programs that fit inside of a telephone booth, because they're going to have a remote printer, and when that part has forecasted to wear down or need to be replaced, they launch an email, it prints on that printer, and then they walk in and grab it. And when you're thinking, for instance, Ben brought up on an oil rig, is a square foot on an oil rig can go up to $2 to $4 million a square foot. So as you think of what that costs in time and money and safety, because that's more room that you could have for people to walk around, maneuver, et cetera, it's huge. So it is this lowest common denominator technology, like the Internet of Things, like Charles talked about. And so the easiest way to do it is to start connecting one or two places that used to be kind of a mission for you to get parts or communicate with engineers at different sites. You'll see a reduction in time and wasted energy of shipping prototypes back and forth or working on problems more manually. It's a fairly easy exercise to see those savings in action, you know?
Yeah, and I'm going to add on to your example of an automotive manufacturer, like having to either redo the tool or get rid of it. What we're seeing a lot, and AJ, you know this, is just resurfacing and maintaining that tool with an additive manufacturing process. So it's kind of a hybrid of it. Let's extend the service life. Let's not go back to, scrap and just, or scratch and start doing this again. And a really good example of it is actually, again, with the Baker Hughes, the drill bits they're using on these oil platforms they're producing, they have a useful life and then they wear down, right? They're drilling into the crust of the earth. What they do now is they use additive process to resurface them so they can, extend their service life by fourfold. So now the cost of the part is, lower, but also they're not producing it 4 times over. And it's things like that you're really, really seeing impacts as far as to the environment, sustainability, and cost savings. It's really rare that you see sustainability and cost savings being like the same. And I think that's what we see with a lot of manufacturers, as being like, oh, yes, this is what we want. And the additive generally is a, zero carbon or carbon zero manufacturing is how a lot of people are looking at it. In part of our work, we're trying to figure out, is it in fact carbon negative? Because what you're seeing a lot of people doing is they're using these printers, which use very low energy, but they're using them on through renewable energy. So their power sources are renewable. Maybe they're doing it through solar, through wind energy, with companies like Vestas producing massive wind turbines that are, powering towns and cities all over the world. When they're plugging in there and then they're using a recycled material that they're printing, you're now becoming carbon negative. And that's the thing that people are looking at, is how deep does this rabbit hole go? And we don't know yet. We're trying to figure it out, but it's really cool. And one thing, and I'll stop, we could move on, is, when dealing with these OEMs, not many people want to talk about exactly what they're doing with their additive program, their cost savings, and how they're doing, because it's giving them an edge over their competition. But when we start talking about sustainability, it's incredible how you see these companies opening up to each other to try to help them quantify it, because they all realize that this is where the world is going or has gone, and they want to get ahead of it. And they see it as a problem, and that they are working together to solve it. And normally they wouldn't. If they start talking about cost savings, they're not going to help. But if they start talking about sustainability, they are getting together, they are talking, and it's a really cool thing to be part of and seeing. And I just appreciate Markforged having a webinar on it that we can kind of share some of this stuff.
And I think we go into the Q&A, but to kind of tie why Würth views Markforged in particular as a platform to answer a lot of this, is a situation that let's use that oil platform, is because Markforged composites are so robust and can live in that environment, is now if there's an emergency, a one-off part that's not on the shelf, something like that goes wrong, there is a manufacturing device on board that can run overnight, producing a solution. So you could have the world's best engineers, I'd help work and identify the problem, try to find a solution. And because you have those reinforced true composites, you have parts that can hold up to some pretty substantial tasks. So what does that mean is historically, instead of launching an email and printing that, they would have a series of helicopter flights from a near seaport or heliport, and they would be flying back and forth with new products or solutions, or reading or trying to find vendors somewhere close to those points or points of access to the rig. The correct term is platform now. But just imagine what happens in an emergency in that situation, the amount of emissions that are getting pumped out to support a solution that is also ultimately causing some environmental hazards. So as you start to compound that out over the hundreds of rigs and platforms around the planet, it's pretty substantial what starts to add up, and how this Internet of Things and having such a reliable kind of strong platform can be put in those areas to test themselves, type of thing.
Yeah, perfect. So that's a lot of good information, guys. AJ and Ben, thanks a lot for sharing some of your insights and some of the things that you've been involved with. It looks like the panel's answering some of the questions within the Q&A window itself, so that's great. Just a reminder to the audience, if you do have a question, go ahead and click on the Q&A button, and you can type in your question there, and we'll go ahead and get it answered. Ben, at one point in time, you talked about the fit for additive and how it, some parts fit well for a digital inventory and some parts may not fit well for a digital inventory. Can you expand on that a little bit and talk to us about, how do you go through that determination, and how do you actually identify parts that fit well into a digital inventory program, and which ones a digital inventory may not be the best fit?
Sure. So we'll just start with having a digital backup or digital twin in an inventory is a good business practice now, and it's readily being adopted. So if it's digital inventory, can just refer to having, a digital file as well as having a physical inventory. So a lot of it, they call them digital twins, so they go hand in hand. But right now, that's kind of preparation for the future. What we're seeing is what's good right now. If we want to use additive manufacturing, for example, 5 and 15% of the parts, generally where you can look is, and there's a lot of technology. There's a lot of software you can use, algorithms to help you identify these parts. But if you just go into your facility, just start asking people what's painful. You find out that MRO is often painful. You find out that tooling, complex tooling, jigs and fixtures, or anything you're machining out of plastic is painful. If you're purchasing 3D printed parts, or if you're purchasing machine parts, that's generally painful. OSHA compliance can be very painful. There is a lot of stuff. It's not often lower production stuff unless you have a company that is making more like medical devices is good. Like you could do a lot of 3D printing of then use components. It's more of the parts that are making the parts, or spare parts, something that's going to help the machine keep the line running. Things like that is where we're seeing the biggest impact. And AJ, you've been in this with Würth for a very long time and in people's buildings. Maybe you could give a little bit more insight than I can.
No, I mean, one, there's a very kind of manual answer, which is we're very regional. You pointed to that kind of how a product gets to a customer's door, Charles. And really what we specialize is in that last leg, right? Is how do we import and consolidate as much as possible and then have quick, efficient logistics to your door. So one is like you said, is those problem parts have always been problem parts for us because there wasn't a good manufacturing solution. You always dealt with minimum orders, or you dealt with tooling costs or something similar. And so as a supplier, it would make it very difficult because it's not a good deal for anybody. Nobody wants to pay for the tooling costs of tens of thousands of dollars for $600 worth of projected product a year. But that's a situation that happens quite a bit. And so that's where we found it and said, well, hey, there's not a technology or an approach today that creates a cost-effective solution. And that's where additive fits in perfectly. Is as Würth as a supplier is we can take advantage regardless of your quantities or your specifications, and we can give you that best total cost of ownership. that total cost of ownership more and more is including how do you get it to my door, and how much impact does that have on the environment, right? But things like carrying costs and holding tooling and the square footage you run to it, and then corralling them when you run out, because I always say is the part that you buy $75,000 of it a year, everybody pays attention to it and you have your eyeballs on that part. But when that part, you only spend $120 a year, probably yourself and the OEM that you're buying it from aren't paying as much attention to it. That's the way it works. And so by being able to kind of give that customer a choice of, when to plug it in, is where we found it to be very beneficial. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and just as, again, a real example is I was a fastener guy for a long time. Let's think about this as a fastener guy, is whenever you're designing something, you want the least amount of fastening points as possible. Those are points for damage and failure. So as you're designing these new products, is not only do you have a chance of going from 6 products to 2, so it's more durable, it wears differently, it doesn't have as many points of failure, etc. But you got to remember is by going from 6 to 4, you got rid of 4 different boxes, as I call them. That's 4 parts that don't need to get made, get shipped, get delivered, get handled, have POs cut for them, be managed. All that's gone. And that's really when it compounds, is when you get rid of numerous parts that are going through, for instance, a part with Stanley Black & Decker, it was 4 parts that went down to a single, and one was a casting, one was cut out of a water jet, and the other 2 were commodity fasteners. So all of them had to be made. All of them have their own production cycles with their own waste, with their own energy depletion, things like that. And now you're getting rid of 75% of that activity. And it's 1 truck with 1 box to make those 4 parts become 1. So that's kind of that, again, compounding picture that we see going forward, and why we want to be in the middle of it.
I wanted to add on a little bit about I was thinking about the oil rig and the helicopter that goes out there. A lot of the environmental cost of getting a part to your door is not getting the part itself to your door. The vehicle itself weighs 1,000 times what the part weighs, right? So when you do these sort of last leg deliveries, when you're doing one at a time and having a 10,000 pound truck deliver a part to your door, that's the carbon cost, right? Like when we talk about transportation, the carbon cost, like that's where it's all built in. So I definitely see this like really good value with Würth, where they're providing you, as you say, you're bringing all these parts to the door at once, right? That in itself, logically speaking, is reducing the carbon footprint. And I guess I wanted to address here a question here from Sammy. The question is, in most cases, when we talk AM, the term PLA and being a biodegradable made from corn is thrown around. How does Markforged argue the sustainability of materials? So PLA, I would say, is questionably biodegradable. Like, yes, it is made from corn in a lot of cases, but the time of degradation, if you were to put it into a landfill, it still could be hundreds of years. If you have it under certain conditions, you can break it down, but it's not like a specifically it's still plastic at the end of the day. What we're seeing with most of our parts, actually, and the nature of them not being really disposable parts, we're not making plastic containers here. We're making the equipment that maintains lines. We're making stuff that lasts for years and years and years, as true metal replacement parts. The impact of that, sort of like when we're comparing the cost of your personal choices versus the cost of group choices, it's like that one part that you're making where it could have a huge carbon footprint is now being supplanted instead by just material that was already shipped to your door. Würth brought it along with the last refresh of the digital Kanban, and that for you, when you're making a part, has almost net as a very low cost carbon wise, and that part that's going in, because it contains carbon fiber, or could, in this case, could also be a metal part, is going to stay on your production line for, 5 years, 10 years. And that's where the real benefit comes from. That to say, we are obviously going to continue to investigate recyclable materials, but what we're seeing in practice is that the parts are being used for a long time. And in that sense, recyclability is something that will eventually come, but is not the top priority right now.
Yeah. Could I take a panelist question, Rod?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Cool. And I know we got great questions coming in, so I just want to get through them. So one of them asked, we have business cases built for today's webinar around the cost savings by sustainability and digital inventory. I want to make kind of a distinction here. The cost savings of that effect of it is just because it's additive. And yes, we have tons of business cases built for it. Markforged is built on the business case of additive saves you significant amounts of time and money. The digital inventory, you see them with Eiger, you see us within CPS, there's a huge amount of cost savings as far as just lowering carrying cost of inventory. As far as where you get sustainability, it's almost a byproduct of using additive. Is you're not looking to save, increase your margins as a company or save time in production or anything like that with sustainability typically within a company. But if you can do a process that is very sustainable that does that, that's a huge win, because now you're not just saving money, you're saving a ton, literally tons of carbon from getting into the atmosphere. And you're able to then market yourself as being a greener manufacturer using new technologies, which tends to get you stickier with customers, which tends to make you more favorable when it goes to the market. So do we have anything that specifically ties sustainability to cost savings? No, not really. But we have a ton of stuff that ties additive to cost savings and additive to sustainability. So it's not directly correlated, but it's indirectly correlated. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer to the question. Keep typing in your questions, and we'll get to them as time fits. There's let's see, the panel members, you have access to these questions as well. Let's see if we can get to another one. So one of these is around one of the major sustainability gains is shortening of supply chains. What is the trend for Markforged in the UK and EU? Do you have facilities in that region? Markforged has facilities around the world, but as a partner, Würth has a lot of facilities around the world. AJ, you want to speak to that a little bit around Würth's footprint and how that can help from a sustainability point of view?
Sure, and it really kind of goes into a lot of what we talked about before, which is being able to consolidate. So, for instance, until there is production sites, because that's the ultimate answer to the AA, the anonymous attendee. I love that they're hiding back there, but that's the ultimate answer. It would also be optimal if you could have your petrochemicals and different things that you need to go into it to make your plastics, et cetera, are local as well. That would kind of, again, make it as optimum as possible. But one way that, for instance, Würth can help with this is you put on our logistics hat, which is Markforged should create a large purchase, and we should move that large quantity in one go, not smaller quantities over and over and over and over again. Because what we can do is, to that point, is work with our European logistics network or our US logistics network to push that product closer to the customer and cut down the amount of large freight that has to happen to go through the transaction. The more we can consolidate that, and again, the same delivery that's doing screws, clips, clamps, chemicals, PPE, your tools, the more that you have those products on the same truck being delivered, again, that's less individual people going out to deliver a product or fulfill that. So that is kind of the Würth game by design, is very large industrial centers that can house and bring in bulk product that help gives customers that security and safety net. But then you have to have people closer to be able to help enable them, support them locally, and again, have product at that short distance. So it's kind of a big logistics question. And I think it's a giant topic. I think Ben touched on it, is they call it the energy transition, is as everyone tries to not get in a car or a plane or a boat to deliver something, and they want to cut down on their emissions, energy doesn't disappear. It transforms. So the question will be, is if it's not in a car, if it's not in a boat, if it's not, where is that energy going, and can that energy be driven as economically as possible? Because there is the argument of, well, you have to build the wind tunnels or the wind blades, you have to build the solar panels. And yes, of course, that's true. But that is a one-time sunk cost, and the output is multitudes cleaner than the alternative. So again, it's a lot of nuance, and there is no magic bullet, unfortunately. But what there is instead of, having a bullet that hits it, the core of the earth, is we lessen it, and it starts to become less critical, and you start to do less damage. And that is still a massive improvement. If we can get to the point where Charles mentioned earlier, where we're all living, and foraging and for food and stuff like that, then that's how we'll get to absolute zero again, right? But I think humanity likes the internet and stuff like that. So I don't know if we'll do that.
Yeah, I think just adding on to it as far as like locations and stuff, and I actually had to look this up because it changes so much, but now we have in that region, we have over 1,500 locations. So we are very much in the community. We are aware of it. And one nice thing about being partnered with Markforged and like our Würth partnership is they get to utilize all these facilities in our footprint, so that they don't have to make such a substantial investment into it. They can kind of hop on the Würth Group's already existing infrastructure. And our Würth Additive team does the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, perfect. So another sort of comment or question around this is there's a lot of companies all around the world talking about sustainability and or I guess taking action to improve their sustainability. But if an organization has not started looking at additive or using 3D printers anywhere within their structure, how would the panel suggest an organization get started, or where do they begin an additive journey that helps them with their sustainability efforts? And I'll throw it out there for anyone in the panel. Charles, you haven't answered many questions. We'll start with you, see what sort of thoughts you have around getting started.
Getting started, coming from the application engineering side, a lot of people come to us with an idea, right? They said, I've got this problem, I've got this pain, and I think additive can solve it. And what I typically end up suggesting, probably 9 out of 10 times, is, hey, let's take a look at the full picture, right? Let's go walk your production line, and we'll start pointing out we'll see what areas make sense. Each technology also brings a sort of different level of contribution. And I saw a question earlier about from our anonymous attendee about mass production, serial production, and different machines are built for different things. I think in the case of Markforged specifically, we're looking at replacing production tooling. We're looking at functional prototyping, machine development. If you're a systems integrator or work with systems integrators, then you've got probably a ton of components that are candidate parts. So I would say to get started is to become familiar with what the technology actually does. Before you swing a hammer, you should understand, how heavy it is, and you should understand the best way to swing it. So that to me is probably like understanding the technology, and then understanding where your business is, and then finding that intersection. And that's a good place to begin. And that's an area where Markforged and Würth are happy to support it, I think.
Yeah. If I may add on just kind of a simpler point, because you're dead on with how to scale everything and start. But as far as you wanting to start just using additive for sustainability, do anything with additive, and you will be starting doing additive with sustainability. You kind of can't screw it up. So as you figure out where your business goes right into Charles, as you figure out your business case, and generally people are going to be fueled by this for cost savings from different types of risk mitigation things. then scaling what you're learning on whatever you're doing with whatever machine is going to be a sustainable action. And the more you can do and provide cost savings and risk mitigation within your supply chain or your company, it's going to go, pretty direct. You're going to see your sustainability impact go up and up and up and up. And then I know we got a question for Würth on, do we make digital inventory available for customers? Oh yeah, we definitely do. I'll let AJ answer this one. Absolutely.
No, yeah, I more wanted to touch on it is like, it seemed like someone was looking for, one is, Charles, is definitely reach out to Würth or Markforged. We're happy. That's kind of why our regional representation is so important to us at Würth, is we want to go into your building and work, COVID permitting, hand in hand with you. Nylon glove hand to nylon glove hand or whatever. There you go.
Hand sanitizer.
Appreciate that. And so if you're kind of looking for a sniper rifle of a great case for both cost savings and sustainability, and like how does this cut down on the carbon output, is I would look for a complex assembly that or again, Charles hit it, is depends how far you are in your additive journey. But let's say you are pretty savvy and you're just looking for those tools of how to help quantify it, is I would look at how those components in a product that perhaps you're redesigning for additive, and maybe you're doing some part reductions or something similar, I would look at where those parts come from and how they were made. And then I would compare that to how your product that was through a 3D printer, how that came to life. That story is going to be compelling if you take that total cost of ownership, because again, not just the environmental, because yes, you're getting rid of all those touches, all that gasoline that has to get it to you. But you don't have the POs, you don't have the amount of touches with the vendors, you don't have the amount of maintenance that you have to do to make sure those products are in stock. All of that stacks up to your total kind of labor that you put into having that part in inventory for your people to install. And that's where, yeah, again, with Würth, that being our core business, we're pretty well skilled at being able to go and find those, because we're usually supplying those headaches, and it's for a headache for all of us, so that would be kind of a thing. And then in terms of digital inventory, is absolutely is Würth thinks the future is a blend of physical and digital inventory management. And so for people with existing Würth programs, it's an add-on, and there's some exciting things to come from Würth and Markforged on that subject, that when it comes to this conversation of cutting down on waste, there's a lot more in the hopper from this team.
I wanted to address one more one question here from the panel. There's come on, thanks for sharing that. Your AM journey started last year, inspired by Markforged from Labs and EOS. You're saying that you've observed that in your market that there's a cost advantage for machines coming, like lower cost machines, essentially. And I want to point out, like, I guess we didn't go too much into the technology here, but what sets Markforged apart isn't necessarily just one, it's not just the materials, it's not just the machine, it's not just the software, it's also not just our partnership with Würth here. It's the whole package, right? And what that enables you to do, if we're strictly talking about materials, we're using this carbon fiber composite. The continuous carbon composites are totally different from what you're seeing as chopped carbon or base thermoplastics. Like, we're actually having a webinar next week. Come out if you want to join this. But it's the carbon composites give you a 10 times strength increase over your base thermoplastic. So it's not even on the same ballpark, right? If you wanted to look at really a cost justification for something like a Markforged machine, simply just take a look at your aluminum parts, right? You're replacing aluminum parts in this case. It's not necessarily like I'm going to replace this plastic part with another plastic part. If you use composite materials in the way that they're intended, you're going to get a much broader range of applications than you could with any other machine.
And I'm going to add a little bit on to that, if it's okay. As far as like differentiating yourself, security of your IP. I mean, huge within larger OEMs because they're doing and developing really new techniques of manufacturing on these. Markforged offers an unparalleled level of security on your intellectual property. They have ISO 27001 certification. There is so much more. It's why, Würth, we have over 3 million customers, and this is the machine we recommend to put their inventory in part because of that. Dealing with a lot of, machines coming out of China, you tend not to have that security, and that's probably a very big understatement. There is very little security over your IP. If anything, could be the opposite, So as far as larger OEMs, and it's a huge topic.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ben and Charles. So that's good. Thanks for taking that question on. So we have reached the top of the hour, which basically comes to a conclusion of this session. So I want to thank all the audience members for joining in today and being part of the discussion. The questions are great, and it's great to have an interactive session. And also, I want to thank the panel members, AJ, Ben, and Charles. Thanks for your time today and fielding questions and giving your insight on the topic. It's been very, very good. So on the screen right now is some additional contact information. So if anybody has more questions or would like to receive more information, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us in any of those contact methods, and we'll certainly get back to you. And I'll leave this up on the screen for a couple minutes so that everybody can take down whatever they need to. And I hope that you enjoyed your time with us, and I hope everyone has a great day. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, guys.